Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of how-to webinars at Mental Health UK. This one is titled How to Identify Signs of Loneliness and Support Colleagues. My name is Flora Bannerman, and I am the Senior Partnerships Officer at Mental Health UK for one of the leading charities in workplace mental health. I am delighted to be joined here today by a Group Development Officer at our partner Rethink Mental Illness. That's Dominique Toira. Good morning, Dominique. How are you?
Good morning, Flora. Thank you very much. Yes, very good.
Good. Great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sorry to say that unfortunately Judith won't be joining us this morning. She's not feeling too great, so take care, Judith, if you're listening. But it'll be Dominic and I here today discussing the topic of loneliness and supporting colleagues. So just before we get started this morning, a couple of housekeeping points, just as usual. First up, the session is being recorded. We will be sending a follow-up email this afternoon to everybody who's signed up, so you'll be able to watch this recording back if you wish to, or please do share it with family, friends, colleagues, anybody who you think might find this discussion interesting or informative too. We'll also be sharing in that email some links to some of the things that Dominique and I talk about today, so you can look at those after as well. Secondly, we have, hopefully you can see along the bottom of your screen, we have a Q&A function and a chat function. I'd love you if you could make use of those functions and do please share your thoughts and feelings about what Dominique and I are talking about, and put any questions to us that you may have around the topic too, and we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't even do that just now, we will follow up with answers in the email later today. I'll make sure to protect some time at the end of Dominique's and our discussion to make sure we get to as many of your questions as possible. So again, thank you so much everybody for joining us. And I think we'll just dive straight in there, Dominique. So I suppose if we, sort of come back to basics, sort of looking at isolation and loneliness, I guess it feels like a really poignant time of year to be having this discussion with you, Dominique, in the run up to Christmas. What often is portrayed as a really happy and exciting and sort of family and friend filled time of year, that can be feel really isolating, really pressurized for people. But also given the last 18 months that we've been through, people may have experienced isolation or loneliness, more than they ever have done before or in a new way. So it's something that people have been dealing with a lot in the last 18 months. So what would be really useful if we could just start there, and if you could help me to sort of define isolation and loneliness and how those two differ.
Yes, certainly, yes. We've, as you say, that's something that we've been talking about a lot, and I support peer support groups who, of course, suddenly lost that connection of them of being able to see each other face to face, and had to come up with other ways. And it was actually quite interesting to see how the reactions from people about the two concepts about loneliness and isolation, and the word isolation was used, but we did have people come back and say, "Oh, I'm not feeling lonely. This is great. I found that I've actually spoken to people a lot more than I did before. I've connected in different ways." So I think right from the beginning of this, it was quite interesting to think about how those two things can differ. I'm going to read out a definition in a report that we will share with you. And it says, social isolation is the lack of social contacts and having few people to interact with on a regular basis. You can live alone and not feel lonely or socially isolated, and you can feel lonely while being with other people. And I think that is something very important to remember, that somebody can seem to be in a very isolated situation, but actually they won't be feeling the loneliness, and someone else, you know, if we're thinking about colleagues in a busy, when we are face to face in the workplaces, might actually be feeling rather alone. And loneliness is a feeling, and therefore it's very personal. We've spoken about that already, and it's also very subjective in that sense, that we might not understand what somebody else's loneliness is. And also, I think it's very important to understand that it will change over people's lifetimes. It will, and you know, in a very quick space of time. And so also, if we're thinking about how we're going to combat that, which we'll talk about later, it's sort of important to understand the reasons behind people's loneliness, and not and try not to confuse the two things.
Yeah, absolutely, Dominique. It's a really good point. I think you're absolutely right there. You know, it can be it's a very personal experience, and it can really alter and change through someone's life, whether they're feeling lonely or not. And actually, yeah, it's a really good point. You know, you can be in a room full of people, or in a team full of colleagues, and feel lonely, even though you aren't, I suppose, sort of personally isolated from social interaction. But it's that connection with others, and or that lack of connection with others, that can sort of create that feeling of loneliness. And something as well that I know that we've discussed before, Dominique, is how that loneliness isn't a mental health problem or a mental health illness in itself, but the two can be really interlinked and can really sort of compound and impact each other, can't they? So I suppose if someone is feeling lonely, that can negatively impact their mental health. But at the same time, if somebody is experiencing a mental health problem or living with a mental illness, and they don't feel the people around them understand that experience, then they can feel lonely because of that, that lack of connection that they've got with perhaps the people around them. So the two can really sort of impact one another, can't they? So it's
yes.
Really interesting.
And I think also, just to clarify, I think what I was saying, it's the number of it's not maybe the number of our social contacts that define loneliness, but it's the quality of those, and how meaningful they are. So that in a way is, we can measure and say that somebody is isolated because they don't have a lot of contacts, but that may fully be their choice on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what, and you're saying that before, Dominique, that within lockdown there's completely different experiences. Somebody might have been isolated from friends and family because of a lockdown or whatever, but as you say, some people it didn't mean that they felt lonely. So there's a real distinct difference between isolation and loneliness there. So we both already pointed out, I suppose, that the experience of loneliness is very personal, and it can sort of fluctuate through someone's life, and it differs from person to person. But I suppose, as a few sort of general pointers, how might you tell if somebody is feeling lonely?
Right. I'm going to, I'll say that one of the biggest challenges about identifying that someone else is suffering from loneliness or feeling lonely is that it's very hard to admit personally. So I think that we're going to talk about stigma a little bit later as well, but I think that's important to remember. So resistance from sort of indicating to someone else that they're lonely might be met with resistance, because somebody might not be ready to recognize it themselves. If we're thinking about in sort of the workplace, I think maybe somebody unproductive, so maybe somebody who was working before. Now suddenly you feel that there's, you know, less of a that their work is not feeling, you know, they're not being so productive as I've just said. They're less invested in what they're doing. That might come along with getting stuck on a lot of negatives. So feeling rather annoyed by small things in life, in the workplace. Then, of course, a real sort of indicator is that someone is being ill far more frequently than they were. So, you know, they're asking for sick leave, etc. So that is, and maybe talking about disturbed sleep and things like that. So it's sort of an outward sign. Maybe very attached to certain things, to certain hobbies or possessions. So in a sense, fixated on certain things. But again, you know, not everybody who spends time alone is lonely. That's the main thing there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You're right. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's somebody, there's a lot of factors there, as you're saying. It's somebody not, you know, not being sort of the best version of themselves. And you know, you can just tell something's not quite right, and they're sort of I suppose retreating perhaps from contributing or providing their best selves at work. And I think as well, something that we can, I suppose, something we can sort of keep an eye out for as well, that I was thinking about, especially when it comes to workplaces, is perhaps, you know, there's been a big change in somebody's life. That can often make somebody feel quite lonely, that perhaps they've started a new job in your team. You know, especially whilst a lot of us are working from home, it can be quite difficult to make those sort of connections really quickly. So, you know, that can feel quite a lonely experience, starting a new job at any point, but from home as well, definitely. But other things, you know, that could have happened to an individual, perhaps a bereavement or a relationship breakdown, or somebody sort of moved to a new location as well. Those sorts of factors as well can certainly, you know, potentially create those feelings of loneliness.
Yes, yes, definitely. And I also I sort of want to add to that it that we what happens is that sometimes within the workplace, someone might be actually getting on really well and being very productive, but they are working on their own. So now we're talking about isolation, especially at the moment when people are working from home. But actually, they will be feeling those feelings of isolation and loneliness, because maybe increasingly as well, our roles at work are becoming quite individual rather than, and so we'll talk about how to approach things later on, but I'm talking about involving people within organisations. And there was one other point I was, well, yes, one of the resources that we'll bring on talk about later is a organisation called Wavelength. They bring media technology to people, but they do have some interesting information about loneliness. And they also have quite a few what the common signs of loneliness are on their website as well. So we'll give you the link to that later.
Certainly, yeah, we'll definitely link to that, Dominic. Sounds like a great resource. And as well, sort of thinking there as you're speaking, and I wonder if you found this at all with your peer support groups, Dominic, that often if somebody is a sole carer or a single parent or something like that, where they, you know, they've got a lot of responsibility, and a lot of their time is taken up supporting somebody else, that often they can find it difficult to have time for themselves, to do things they like and connect with their own communities as well. So, you know, it can be roles within people's lives as well that, you know, that you might not necessarily think in the first instance could feel quite lonely, but actually it can make it quite difficult for them to connect with others with similar experiences. That's something that you've found through people you talk to in your work.
Yes, definitely. It's all, I mean, almost people, almost loneliness can creep up on you. I was thinking as you were speaking, that you suddenly realize that circumstances in your life like that caring for somebody have sort of shrunk your circles, made you more isolated, and you've had to sort of put that in place, and then you suddenly realize that has increased your sense of loneliness and not connecting with other people. And I think sometimes it's very, very difficult, going back to that point about getting people to admit it, it's very difficult to step back out of it sometimes, because it's become a way of life.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Dominique. And I think what you've just ended talking about there as well, it can be difficult to talk about. It can be, there's for whatever reason, unfortunately, there seems still to be a stigma around feeling lonely, which can't be helpful at all to somebody who's going through something like that and experiencing loneliness. Do you believe that? Do you believe there's still a stigma around loneliness, and how does that sort of come about? What does that look like?
Yes, I mean, yes, the stigma. That's something that I thought about quite a lot. And another resource we're going to share is from the Red Cross, who do actually have a very nice toolkit called Tackling Loneliness. And they have a lot of podcasts on there of people talking about their experiences of loneliness, and it's worth a listen to. Now, one point that they write on there, which I thought is brings together the sort of thoughts about stigma, is loneliness can be directly connected to feeling unaccepted, and I think that's very true. So if we are not feeling connected to the people around us, whether it's within a hobby, and of course this can happen quite often in the workplace, then we are going to experience that loneliness because we feel we're not accepted by everybody else, or people are thinking very differently from us, and I think that stigma can it can also be from the areas of life. You've spoken about bereavement or a breakup, for instance. Now, in terms of maybe as a society, we will quite easily recognise that somebody who's gone through a bereavement will feel lonely, and we will offer our support in that way. But equally, we could then think that somebody's who's gone through a breakup, we might not feel that they feel loneliness in quite the same way, because we're going to think, right, we just get on with it and find a new another relationship. So I think sometimes we have, if we think about it, we might have set ideas of what loneliness can mean for people without even realizing it, and we're almost ready to help in certain situations, and then not in others. At work, that might be the same as well. A loss of a role or something like that. Again, someone moves into a new one, maybe they work in a different team, as you spoke about, and we might not attach that to loneliness at all. We might think that the person just needs more tools to cope with the new way of working or something like that, but forget that actually they might have real connections with people in a previous team have been lost for them. So
absolutely. I think, and it's like you're saying there, I think we've got sort of ideas as a society of what loneliness is, don't we? I mean, that somebody perhaps that lives alone and doesn't have any social interaction whatsoever. And so actually, if you're, if those sort of things don't necessarily apply to you, and you do have people around you, or you work in a team or whatever that is, that, oh, you might feel some sort of stigma that loneliness, that's not what I'm experiencing, because that's reserved for a certain type of people in certain areas of life, and think, oh, I can't, I can't share that with people because they'll think that's sort of, that's sort of the person that I am. And I was listening to a talk with Brené Brown, who I think her title is a sort of social psychologist, and she was talking, it was on a slightly different topic, but she was talking about the difference between shame and guilt, and how guilt is the feeling of, feeling guilty about an action, and then it's actually quite healthy, to be able to hold ourselves accountable and say, that's a behavior and action that I had, and I don't want to do again, and I can learn from that and change my behavior action. But actually shame is a bit different. It's really problematic because it's something that we internalize, and if we feel ashamed, it becomes sort of a defining feature of us. I did this thing, and that's because I am a bad person, or that's part of my personality. Whereas that's not the case, and that's not a useful way to think about it. And I think stigma does that to people, and it makes people feel ashamed and makes people think that being lonely is who they are, rather than just something that they're experiencing at a certain point of life for a certain period of time, rather, and something that can change about your life, and as you've spoken about, and come at different points for different reasons, and it isn't something that defines them. It's something that they will experience for their entire life. So I think that's a really interesting definition that I was listening to. And also, as well, I was thinking about and the intersectionality of some stigmas. I hope that's the correct use of that term. But if somebody is feeling discriminated against due to a different part of their life, whether that's race, gender, or sexual orientation, that sort of stigma and discrimination about that part of their life could make them feel misunderstood and lonely as well. So you've got two sort of forms of stigma there that can be really, really hurtful and really damaging to somebody.
Yes, we have within the groups, there's the peer support groups. So there's a lot of the groups that are not all of them, but are for carers of those with lived experience of mental illness, and they do talk about that sort of isolating feeling of not being allowed, not being able to talk about their experiences with other people, and therefore that's why. The peer support is a valuable thing, because everybody speaks the same language, as someone once told me, in that group. So yes.
For sure, it's yeah, as you say, it's a great way to connect with people that have a similar experience to yourself, and that's what your peer support groups do so well. And there are lots of ways, I suppose, that we can find groups like that, whether it's in person or online, that might have seen similar experiences to us. And I think some of those things that you're going to send around afterwards, Dominique, could be a really useful signpost for those sorts of places. And we'll come on to talk about a bit more of those signposting steps. But I suppose a quick question as well for me is, a lot of us are now working remotely from home, and not, you don't get those sort of classic water cooler moments perhaps within an office. So what sort of things, I guess, can we look out for online perhaps with our colleagues that might indicate that they're feeling lonely when we're not getting that sort of face-to-face contact with them?
Yes, I mean, that's a difficult. We're going almost back to that, the difference between isolation and loneliness. So some of those things that we spoke about at the beginning. I mean, I sort of immediately take, if we're on a meeting and somebody repeatedly doesn't want to put the camera on. Now, I mean, we could that could be for many different reasons. But it could also be that sort of feeling of that disconnection with what's going on in the meeting, what's around them, and that sort of feeling of not quite being able to join in. I think, I mean, one of the things online is, as we all know, it's a bit disconcerting like it is right now to look at yourself and see yourself reflected. And that's, as one of the coordinators from the groups pointed out to me, that you're not used to seeing yourself in a meeting. You're used to seeing the other people, and it makes you focus on different things. And so there's a real almost sense of, rather than interacting with the people in the room, there's that almost concentration on yourself, which makes you feel lonely, because you're evaluating all the time your interaction, because you can see it in that way. And I think it's also very easy, I don't know whether other people feel the same, to sort of be very cheerful. We have a chat in our team that we go on in the morning. Now, I will always be cheerful in that chat, you know, and that won't reflect maybe what I'm feeling. So I wonder if sometimes with the online, we miss those moments, what, you know, we might call the water cooler moments, those where we can actually meet someone and say, oh, you're not looking great today, and have that little chat. Whereas we're maybe feeling that we have to put on a professional front all the time in these meetings that we're having online, or it's very easy to send an email and not pick up the telephone. Also, again, I think that will immediately sort of, in a sense, you might get to the end of the day, you've had lots of emails, but you haven't actually spoken to anybody on the phone. And I can't believe that doesn't, in the end, increase your sense of loneliness.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Dominique. It's choosing, because if you don't have that face to face, it's choosing different ways of communicating that might suit different people, and, you know, make them feel able to make those sort of more authentic connections with colleagues, even if they are online. And I think you're right. Phone calls or whether that is a chat that they feel more comfortable sort of typing a message, it's really key to be in tune with how people want to communicate whilst working from home, which can then sort of, you know, if somebody says that they like doing phone calls or video calls, and then if for a few weeks they haven't turned their video camera on, whereas they usually like communicating that way, you know, that could be a sort of sign that they're not, that they don't feel like connecting, and that they feel like their connections, that they're not getting anything from the connections that they're making. So sort of, I suppose, looking out for those changes really is what you're talking about there, Dominique, isn't it? You know, if somebody is usually productive at work and is one way at work, and then something changes whilst you're working with them, that's, you know, it's just something to pick up on. And I think as well, what I would find, and something we've talked about there, is that if somebody is feeling lonely, they perhaps are lacking in self-confidence, the ability to contribute to a group discussion, to a chat with the team or whatever it is. So just keeping an eye out to make sure that, you know, that everybody is contributing to their usual extent. It doesn't have to be all the time, but just what they would usually be doing is something for sure to keep an eye out for.
Yes, and I think I just, you know, we have said it more than once, I think, that, you know, the problem of people admitting loneliness. So I think that's struck me as you're speaking there, is that looking for signs, they are the signs of so many other things. So that's what the problem is, isn't it? That is almost sort of a hidden thing. No, I mean, people aren't really going to say I'm lonely. They are going to say all the other things. And in a way, it's that interaction between two people to realize, well, actually what the problem is here, this person is not having support, let's say, in their personal life. They are quite lonely, and therefore when they come to work, maybe they'll need a little bit more support, because they're not getting that, you know, back at home. I mean, how many of us do actually sort of go home and want to talk about work for a bit? I mean, most of us do that. That is, so for recognizing that somebody doesn't have that moment elsewhere is maybe important. But the main thing is the signs will look like many other things.
And so I suppose that leads me on to my next question, Dominique. If you have noticed some changes, you know, whether you're not quite sure if that's loneliness or something else that's sort of impacted their mental health or their behaviour, you know, how can you have that conversation with someone? What's the best way to, I suppose, approach somebody that you might be concerned about, or you want to connect with? You know, what steps can you take? What sort of advice or places to signpost could you offer them?
Yes, I think it's being non-judgmental. It's going back to that idea of stigma, losing the ideas behind why somebody might be feeling lonely, and to really listen. As I said, the signs might be other things. So allow someone to speak and to talk about those, what they're feeling. Now, one of the things in a report, there's a book by Jacqueline Olds called "Overcoming Loneliness in Everyday Life," which has some very useful pointers there, and I think is an interesting read, because it's just what it says: in everyday life. So not thinking that it's a particular group of people who experience loneliness, but all of us, and across all ages, rather than we tend to think, or have done, about loneliness with the older generation. Age UK is one of the resources. I mean, obviously they've been thinking about this for a long time, way before COVID, and they do have some really useful resources. But what we're talking about today is loneliness for people across all those ages. One of the things she talks about a lot is joining a group that have a shared purpose. Now, of course, I can back that up completely, because that's what our peer support groups are. They are people from all walks of life, all shapes and sizes, but they have a shared purpose to share their experiences. And many of the groups don't just do that. They will join to do gardening together, or art and craft together, or walk together. So I think that is, I mean, you know, if you think of loneliness in a sense that you move to a new town and you don't know anybody, you know, yes, what would I go and do? I'd go and join a group of maybe a sports, something that I enjoy, and then eventually you will make a friend, because those people have that shared experience. And I think that's sort of, you know, so if you have a colleague who you feel that is lonely, then maybe suggesting that you do something together would be, you know, a good point. I had a colleague once who I did think was rather lonely. They had gone through a bereavement, and it was quite long term. And I just suggested going to see a film, because we were both realised that we both liked the same type of films and things. And then from that conversation came out that they hadn't actually been out on their own in the evening for over 2 years, and felt very nervous about that. And I had no idea, absolutely no idea, to the extent behind that. So I do think that's you know, a practical thing to actually suggest, let's go and do something together.
Yeah, I really love that, Dominique, and I think it's so powerful. The idea of suggesting to someone, you know, that they join a group that's the community group that takes on an activity, or do that with them, because I think quite often, whether it's about loneliness or something else that somebody might find difficult to talk about, that doing an activity, you know, gardening, as you say, some arts and crafts, or even just going for a walk together, that sort of side-by-side element is much less intimidating for somebody to talk. And, you know, and I feel it myself, to talk about something when you're not just sat at a desk staring straight into each other's eyes, you know, that not a particularly, it doesn't feel like a particularly natural or comfortable way to have a discussion. And whereas if you're doing something side by side, you know, quite often the conversation can flow more naturally. And as you say, if you talk about one thing, the films that you're watching, or the things that you like, then that can lead on to those those points which may take a little while for somebody to sort of warm up to talk about. So I think that's a really useful takeaway there, to suggest doing something whilst you're talking. And I think as well for me, there, you know, when I want to talk about something that I find difficult to talk about, which could be something like loneliness, I think what I like to, you know, what I've experienced is being in a place where I feel comfortable to do so. So, you know, if you're approaching somebody, asking them, you know, do you want to talk about this now, or can we check in later at a time that suits you, in a place at a time that suits you? You know, I'll wear my headphones, you know, if I was in a room full of people, to make sure that they are first of all confident and comfortable wherever they are in the situation before that conversation starts. Is sort of one that I've taken away and used sort of myself. And I think as well, you know, empowering somebody as well. So I think that, you know, people can be worried, and I've actually seen a question, I know we'll take questions then, but I've seen somebody is asking, you know, they've noticed a colleague perhaps feeling lonely, but don't want to come across patronising or pitying, especially if you aren't necessarily experiencing the same thing. But what often could be a useful way to approach it is asking someone, you know, about what they're experiencing, but also how they, you know, what would they like to see happen from this? What would they like to change, if anything? What do they think they would like to do to take the next step? So I think, you know, like you're talking about there, going to the cinema, if that's what that person likes to do and wants to do, they feel empowered to make that suggestion, that choice. So really, this is your role, I guess, is listening actively and empowering the other individual to suggest the changes that they want to see.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll bring in again about the British Red Cross and their toolkit, because I said there was a podcast. It's called The Kind Place. So I think that really, you know, links in nicely with what you've just said. It is about listening to people, and those people have a lot talk about their coping strategies within there, so they're useful to listen to, or even, you know, point to someone else, because it's something they can sort of listen to in their own time as well. And I think it's also, you know, thinking about that not being patronizing. Yes, that is very hard, isn't it? Again, it's getting someone to admit it. So really talk about lots of other things. I did speak about people being isolated, you know, in work, and we're working by ourselves. So do a project where you really are doing something together, so it's not, you make it more interactive. Maybe your role would be that someone is just you're going to write a report, and someone's actually just going to comment on it, or like, but make that more interactive. Make that sort of, that you actually ask questions about, you know, the work. What do you think about this? Involve the person. Often loneliness comes with those feelings of, you know, not being worthy, not like we said, not fitting in. So just, you know, find way. I know we're all very busy, sometimes that's very difficult, but find ways to actually actively involve people in the workplace, in decisions, and that often gives people meaning, and then is a little sort of boost in confidence that they need to then tackle loneliness if it also is occurring in their private sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great shout of how to implement that work as well. And I think as well, you know, you've talked about there a toolkit from the British Red Cross, which we will definitely signpost to. And I just wanted as well to share with everybody our online community Click, created and sort of moderated by Mental Health UK. And I'll share the link to that as well. But it's an online community which, you know, that anybody can join. where you can share your experience, get that sort of peer support, talk to others with similar experiences to you, all online. So sort of no matter where you are, there's always somebody to connect with. And the unique thing about Click as well is that there's always somebody online. We have moderators who are online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's always somebody to talk to if you ever are feeling lonely. So that's a really great one that we'll definitely signpost to in the follow-up email. So with all these sort of suggestions and perhaps that you're making for somebody to sort of become less lonely, what, as somebody might implement some of those suggestions and do things that they want to do, what could change look like? And does that happen straight away, do you think, Dominique? Does somebody just one day become not lonely, or does it take a little bit longer than that?
That's a very interesting question. I think the answer to that is yes, it can take a lot longer, and of course it's something that will come back and will change in different ways through experiences in our life. And I think sometimes we'll totally miss it in somebody who is outwardly seems very confident, and their outward signs will almost be being really busy and appearing super connected and chatty, and actually they're hiding something else. So I think really, again, it's about the quality of the relationships. It's about knowing people. It's about checking in on all the time, and it's about people's well-being, and it's not something that has a beginning and an end. I'm afraid it's something that we're going to always have to think about.
I think as well what you had said at the beginning of our conversation, Dominique, how that it can come and go in a lifetime as well. It's not something that we should think that you banish one day and that you never experience loneliness again. It can come and go in parts of our lives, and that's natural for those sort of changes to impact us in that way, and to be, I suppose, kind to ourselves and kind to others around us that might experience that at different parts of their life. And I think as well what you're saying there about quality of relationships. What perhaps you might notice is somebody feeling more able to open up about how their weekend was, or how they're feeling today, or those sorts of things. Just that person then clearly is finding more value in the connection that you're having and the conversations you're having, because they feel that they can sort of contribute and that you are really invested in finding out actually how they are. So that's obviously hopefully a really positive change that you might see in somebody over time. And there's an overarching sort of brief question again, which sort of fits into some of the questions that we've had coming through, and we've had a few coming through, Dominique, which is great. And one is, what can we do as colleagues to break down the stigma surrounding the loneliness and keep our colleagues connected? So thinking about as a workplace, an employer perspective, what are some of the different things that an employer could do for their colleagues to make sure that they feel connected to their colleagues?
Make sure that get-togethers are sort of meaningful. When we're asking that question, how is everybody, that it's also not always maybe at the same time. I'm thinking a little bit about online meetings here as well. I do remember in the middle of lockdown thinking, if somebody asked me one more time how I'm feeling today on a Monday morning, I'm going to throw something at the screen. So I think it's realizing that it's not the same for everybody. Some people would be quite happy to talk about it in an open forum, and other people won't. But that leads me to the fact that we really actually do talk about it. I mean, it really is something when you look at the reports and things, you will realize that it is actually a massive problem in our society, and something that we have a minister of loneliness, so which I don't think everybody knows. So it is being taken seriously by the government as well. So it's not, but there is we don't talk about it. We are talking about a lot more, thankfully, mental health and depression and anxiety, but you very rarely hear that word loneliness spoken about. So it's and maybe you'll feel with your colleagues that you don't want to mention that word. It's not going to be the word that you actually use. So therefore, it's about the other things. It's about connecting to people, asking how they're feeling, sending, if we are working online, sending little things through the post every now and again. I remember getting just out of the blue, a Kit Kat and a tea bag and a little card, and I can't tell you how much that meant. You know, just that little gesture to sort of say that we're all there and connected. But going back to the point, making things meaningful, yes, don't allow time. Don't think, okay, we've asked the question, but really if something's going to open up from one of those conversations, you actually do have a plan in place that you will be able to deal with that if someone really does need to talk further and have some support. And when you start opening up the conversation, you have those resources ready behind you. And then I would also recommend do some reading around the subject so that you feel when someone comes in front of you that you do have some tools at your fingertips.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be different for everyone. And I think as an employer or the manager, thinking about all those different ways, as you said, Dominique, people want to communicate differently. So it might not be in a group chat, it might be in a group chat. And I know something that we've set up is we've sort of chosen little emojis that mean different things. I'm trying to think now. Busy bee means, you know, I'm quite busy today, can check in, but I've got a lot on. And we've got those sort of things that each member of the team sort of sends at the start of the day to sort of summarize how they're feeling. And then I suppose if any of those sort of seem off, then I guess you could approach that colleague individually as well to have that conversation. I think as well, you know, when you're talking about that sort of being authentic as well, that sort of how are you checking? One thing that I've learned from an old colleague was just adding the word today at the end of that sentence can make it feel much more authentic and much more meaningful. How are you feeling today, rather than just how are you, sort of passing, you know, not really looking for an answer, but giving that person a bit of more time than you usually would to answer that conversation might allow for a more meaningful conversation. And something as well, you know, I talked briefly about intersectionality before, but often what I've found people have felt connected to workplaces, they've had networks set up, colleague networks set up for different groups. So whether that's related to gender or race or sort of a pride group network and things like that as well, or whether it's just related to interests like you're saying there, you know, a gardening group or an arts group or a social group or something like that. So those are a really lovely way to give people the choice to be connected in ways that suit them and with colleagues who they think they'll have more of a connection with. So that, you know, I think what we're saying there is making sure there's lots of different ways people can be connected at work. And one, I think as well, we talked about, you know, moving into a new workplace can be really daunting and can feel really lonely, especially if doing so from home. So perhaps in induction processes, you know, you can make it part of a policy of induction processes where a new member of team has to have X number of check-ins, just coffees or teas or whatever it is, with people from different parts of the organisation, so that they've got more chances to connect with others. And
I would just also suggest maybe connecting with mindfulness activities, and whether there's something you put on within the organisation, or make them people aware of them or available, because through that people will it makes people realise they're become aware of their own thoughts in difficult times, how to accept those thoughts, reject them, and how to talk. So what I'm talking again is about that difficult thing for people to actually talk about. So mindfulness actually is not for everybody, but some of those skills connected to that are in a sense something that can be introduced in workplace practices.
Great, thanks, Dominique. So we've got a few minutes left, and we've had a few questions, and hopefully some of them we've touched on already. But a couple of ones that that we can certainly look to just now. But you know, we've had somebody ask, you know, if I've definitely felt very lonely before in a previous role, and they haven't felt comfortable approaching that with their manager. So, you know, do you have any advice on if somebody should feel like that again, should feel lonely, but, you know, don't have, I suppose, that relationship with their manager? What, you know, what else could they do in that situation?
Yes, that, I mean, that is, you know, exposing, yes, our fears a bit of being laughed at, of not being taken seriously. So I suppose if you are in a workplace where some of the things we've spoken about, where talking about your feelings will be taken seriously, so again, that emphasizes that importance for those of us who are managing other people, that we do have those processes in place. And also, I would say that they are processes that you do actually think about them, that you do actually plan and think about them, and don't just think that, oh, because I'm aware of them now, they're happening. So you give yourself those checks and balances that's happening. And then, of course, well, I mean, if happening yourself is to find maybe somebody who you can talk to with the organization, and you know, generally try, you know, be brave and speak out, because also we're talking very much about giving other people the space to talk. But sometimes, do you know what, when we're the one who makes that first move, when we start talking, we suddenly realize that people will respond. And that's, you know, people go into the peer groups, that's what they find. So, you know, I know it's a brave thing to do for people, but sometimes you'll be absolutely amazed at the response that you get back when you open up a little bit, because everybody else is immediately, oh, right, yes, and will be able to then bring their own experiences there. So, you know, especially at the moment when people have been through so much together, we do have a collective and shared experiences of things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's, you know, and if it's not your manager that you feel is approachable to talk about something like this, then, you know, have a bit more of a think around your team. Is there another colleague that perhaps you work closely with that you think that you feel more comfortable talking to about this sort of thing? And teams like HR teams as well are there as well to support colleagues if you work in a business with a team like that who perhaps you could approach too. And as well, often companies have things like EAPs, employee assistance programs, where they have services where you can talk to someone too that you might find useful as well. But as well, it's, you know, and Dominique, you and I will send around some of those signposting resources too. You know, that there are places like Click, like I've talked about, where you know, it is out with your work colleagues, but there is peer support and points for peer support elsewhere. And I see someone's also talked about trade unions there in the chat, which is so true. There are different networks, so, you know, don't think that you know, it's just that one person you have to talk to. If they don't understand you, then nobody will. It's really not the case. As you said, you'll be surprised by the different people and the range of people out there that'll speak to you and have empathy and be able to support you through what it is that you're experiencing. So I think hopefully we've answered, there's quite a few questions here, and hopefully we've answered those, I suppose, around, you know, how to approach a colleague if you are suspecting that they're lonely. And it's that sort of authentic approach, isn't it, and giving them space and time to talk about what they want to do. Again, perhaps taking on an activity or doing something whilst you're talking about it might give them confidence to have that conversation. And we've got one other question, I suppose, here that talks a bit more about those specific groups within a community and how to engage them in a conversation about loneliness. So, you know, as we said there, perhaps an LGBTQ you know, member of a community or a mum's network or something like that, and how to engage them in a conversation about loneliness. I suppose for me, you know, whether you have networks at work that you could recommend somebody, you know, links in with, or whether as well, if that is part of what their experience is and why they're feeling lonely, you know, educate yourself as well. Support them to do a bit of looking around of different communities and different places they could get peer support with people from similar networks and backgrounds to themselves, and provide that signposting. I think the key there is you might not have a similar experience to someone. You might not have the same experience as someone, but so you can't and you shouldn't feel that you should need to offer advice and solve everybody's problems, but it's that ability to signpost, isn't it, Dominique? Having that note of resources that you can signpost people to is really important.
Yes, that's right, and actually the tackling loneliness toolkit from the British Red Cross that I've mentioned more than once, it is actually thinking about minority groups. So those podcasts that I'm talking about of people experiences, they are drawing on a wide section of society there. So that definitely has been their remit there. So that is a good tool, and we'll send the link to that. Someone just popped up in the chat about many companies still have mental health first aiders. Who are a good point of call, and again, that could be a resource if that isn't within your organisation, to find somebody within the organisation who would like to do that training. It's very good. It can happen over a period of time, or can be an intensive 48-hour course. But again, it covers a wide range of things. And tackle and helps you recognise signs among colleagues within the workplace, and is a port of call for people to come to. And that, that may be, for some people, that is what they need. They need to think that there is a title, there's someone within the organisation that they can go to for that. They have someone that they go to for all the other work questions, and sometimes big, within HR, if there is somebody, or that person might not even have to sit within HR, but somebody who has gone through that training. We have, at the end of the day, we have always had first aiders for physical health, haven't we? We all know who it is. We're all told where all that is. So why not also have that mental health first aider in the workplace too?
Definitely, and the key role of a mental health first aider is to know where to signpost people to for support. So they're definitely a great resource if your company has those in place already. I think we're just about out of time there, Dominique. So we'll wrap up there, and we'll follow up with the recording of the session for you to watch back or to share if you like, and also links to those resources, British Red Cross and Click and so on, for you to look at afterwards. So thank you everybody so much for listening, and Dominique, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really informative, and it's such a big topic that I know we could have continued talking about long into the rest of the day. We're going to be taking a little break of our how-to webinars over the festive period, but we will be back next year, so we'll be sure to send round the topic and the date and the sign up link for the next how-to webinar in the new year, so keep an eye out for that. But a big thank you from me once more for everybody for joining us this call. I hope you found it useful. Take care, look after yourself and those around you, and I hope if you're celebrating, you enjoy your Christmas and a happy new year when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you.